and there's certain points where it's going to get worse. Like, if you're wading into the water, I'm like, okay, my toes are cold, my knees are cold. Oh, it's going to get to my bits and that's going to be really cold. And like, you're anxious for the point where it hits your bits. And then there's some more bits that you're like, oh, I'm fine until, and there they go underneath. Like, and you have this, like, I just need to do it. And there's this internal struggle. And it's like, I mean, I'm going to say,
just the moral of the story is get all your bits in one go.
That it's going to go to that point, but it's like,
I think we found our intro for the podcast. Hello, and welcome to Well Shit. It really is that simple. I'm Claire.
And I'm Serena. On this podcast, we help you to understand about your 12 universal needs, why they are currently not being well met,
how to meet them in ways that work for you, and how to consistently do so in quick, easy, and simple ways that fit seamlessly into your life.
We'll also help you to understand how doing so will have a positive ripple effect in literally every area of your life.
If you like what you hear, sign up for more support with meeting your needs with your weekly Universal Needs notes at theuniversalneeds.com.
And enjoy the show.
Hello.
Hey, everyone.
It's been a slightly dramatic week here. I am, as somebody who is a Brit, sometimes living in the tropics can be a somewhat jarring experience to previous experiences of life. And I mean, as somebody who if I'm sure if you've been listening for a while now, you may know that when I first arrived in Key West, Hurricane Irma was my welcoming committee, and Hurricane Irma was a Category 5 hurricane. Now, we don't have Category 5 hurricanes in the UK. We don't have Category 1 hurricanes in the UK. That is not something I'm used to dealing with. So I'm used to having unusual experiences. And most of them are, that was a pretty dramatic one, and it was a pretty intense experience. But most of the whole things, it's like, you deal with geckos here everywhere inside your house, which you don't deal with in the UK. I don't care about that. Most of them are pretty okay. This week, though, I had one that was less than okay, and in accordance with the topic of today's podcast, definitely got me connected with my emotions pretty damn quickly. I was sat on the couch watching TV, and all of a sudden I saw something like crawl across the wall, and it wasn't. I'm somebody. One of the things that is very common with neurospicy people is a lot of us don't like having large lights on in a room. We prefer lots of small lights and a kind of lower, more ambient light, and that's how I roll. So it wasn't particularly bright. And I looked over, and I saw something crawling. And in the tropics, you see something crawling, you go and grab something to squish it with pretty quickly. Like that's kind of your go-to, especially because we have palmetto bugs here, which are the tourist-friendly way of saying roaches. They're very common around palm trees. There are palm trees everywhere here, which means that you're going to have them. Like it's one of those, like, I live on a tropical paradise island, and that's one of the downsides. So I went to get some paper towel, and then I looked at it, and by the time I got back, it had disappeared. But I looked at it long enough to realize there was a scorpion crawling across my wall, and it was a pretty sizable one at that. And I have not, before this point, encountered a scorpion, I'm very happy to say. I got connected with my emotions real fucking fast. I ended up pulling I went searching for it, because there are certain things where it's like, okay, I don't particularly want a roach around my house that I can't see, but a scorpion, you definitely don't want to find that where you're not expecting to see it, as you can testify, because you have had that experience, haven't you, where you discovered one somewhere that there shouldn't have been.
And it doesn't matter. My first experience with a scorpion happened to be in Key West, and every experience thereafter, it's never one that I'm like, ooh, a scorpion. Like they're always kind of jarring. And eventually I had to say, you're like, all right, well, I didn't step on that one. Yay,
me. Yay me, exactly. So I ended up with I was messaging a friend of mine who was just down the road, and he sent me a thing with like essential oil blends. And I'm not someone who relies just on essential oils. I threw everything at it. I had the home defense spray going. Other sprays are available. I had essential oils everywhere. I was barricading the bottom underneath the bedroom door so it couldn't get in. Unfortunately, it is still, I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, depending which way you look at it, it hasn't appeared again. And this has been a few days now. I'm hoping it just exited the building. But one of the things that we tried, and it's funny, I've actually now said to the person I live with, like, we can't use these anymore. We tried the sticky traps because they're supposed to be good for getting them. Unfortunately, all I caught was geckos, and I really like the geckos, and we love them in the house because they get rid of other bugs. I am now an expert at safely removing a gecko from a sticky trap without hurting it, like covering the pad, the sticky pads with paper towel and dousing it in, it's actually avocado oil because that's what I had in a spray thing. I mean, it's going to taste amazing, I'm sure. But not that we eat geckos here, just in case anybody's wondering. But yeah, spraying them enough and then using a bit of paper towel to kind of nudge it so I could move it off the sticky bit without hurting it. 3 I've done that with now. So yeah, sticky traps are now in the trash because I do not want to be doing that as much as I can, and I'm happy to. I'm like, we're not catching the thing we're supposed to be catching. We're catching a bunch of stuff that I don't want to harm. So yeah, high drama here in Key West this week. Could have done without it, but definitely got me very much in touch with my emotions pretty damn fast. So and today we are kind of following on from last week. We're doing kind of a little kind of mini series on emotions because they are a really big part of meeting our needs, and they are a very compromised part a lot of the time of meeting our needs. And while they're not, it's not one of the big three, it is a very, very close second in terms of the ones that are constantly compromised in our society. And so this episode actually it was prompted by a session I had with a client the other day, where they shared that they were like, they knew, like, logically they know that they need to connect with their emotions more. They like, that's part of the process, and that it's going to meet their needs better, and they haven't done it in the past very much. So and I've given them some of the stuff that we talked about in the last episode on how to connect with your emotions more. If you haven't heard that and you want to have a listen, go back and listen to that one first. So there's like, logically and intellectually, this person knows that's something that they need to do, but there's this kind of reticence around doing it that's kind of causing them to be hesitant. And a lot of the time, the more hesitant you are with your emotions, the harder the process is.
Mhm.
So like, I remember many years ago, a friend of mine said to me, she said, Clay, you're the only person I know who, when you see heartbreak on the horizon, you walk towards it rather than away from it. And I'm like, well, yeah, because if it's part of my journey, I want to go deal with that shit as quickly as possible, so it's not hanging around for longer. A lot of us kind of tend to be like, oh yeah, but I don't really, and in doing so, we have to deal with that emotion, uncomfortable though that it is, for even longer. Like, it hangs around longer, it bothers us for longer, it affects our lives for longer. And so while I was talking to this client, I came up with this analogy, and actually, as we were just logging on, I actually thought of another one that also works quite well in this. And I thought this might be helpful for people to share. The first one comes, if I forget the second one, because I'm the one talking right now, just say arrow to me, it'll come back. She's going to make a note. Look at us using our little, and if you don't know why we're talking about notes and like so excited about this, 2 episodes ago, we like go back and listen to that episode where we talked about why we're now taking little notes on our phone. So the first like analogy that came to mind about this came from a comedy bit by a comedian that I've followed for a while in the UK called Michael McIntyre. And he does a lot of very kind of observational humor. And he's talking about when Brits are on vacation. He's doing this whole thing about Brits on vacation. And he said, like, no matter where it is in the world that a Brit is on vacation or on holiday, as we would call it, inevitably you kind of sunbathe for a little bit, and then you get hot enough to the point where you want to get in the pool to cool off. Most of us will go in and we'll kind of dip our toes in the water, but the contrast in temperatures between the heat that we've had sunbathing and the cool of the water feels pretty jarring. And it's like, oh, like, and there's this kind of like your entire body tenses up and you constrict and everything. And he says about, and this is so true. And I mean, I don't know if anyone here knows any Brits or has vacationed with us. This is very representative of us as a people. That if you have that moment where you're kind of going to get in the water and it feels a little cold, inevitably somebody else will swim past going, it's all right once you're in. And it's like, oh God, yeah, we do that, don't we? Busted. But I think the same is true with our emotions and with starting to process our emotions. And this is the reason that I kind of mentioned the different pools in the last episode, because I can imagine someone listening to what we were saying in the last episode and saying like, oh, you got to tiptoe gently into your emotions and tiptoe gently into the emotional experience expression. Now, we're not saying that. What we're saying is start off with an emotion that maybe is a little bit lighter and we think might be a little bit easier to process and go heavier. But the thing is that if when we are actually going into the processing of an emotion, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what the situation is, if we dip our toes in, when we start to dip our toes into emotion, initially it's kind of uncomfortable and can be jarring, and it can cause us to recoil and tense the same way as it would if we were kind of dipping our toes into the water. And the analogy follows in the sense that if when you're getting into a swimming pool or into the ocean or whatever it is and you're going in for a swim, if you put your toes in and then you pause for a second and you stay at that point where just your toes are in the water, and then you maybe go up to your ankles and then you pause, and then you go up to your shins and then you pause, and then you go up to your knees. Every time you take another little step into the water, you have to deal with that jarring experience every single time over and over again, where it's like, oh God, we feel it with our toes. And then it's like, oh, we feel it with our ankles. And I mean, I've done this in the past where I'm like wading into the water with my hands up here so I don't put my arms in the water because it feels cold and it feels jarring and it doesn't feel comfortable. And I don't, like, part of me is like, why are we doing this? It doesn't feel comfortable. I don't like it. And the thing is that once we get to the point where we have submerged ourselves, normally kind of up to the neck, somewhere around there, or if we are going fully in, like fully in with our head and everything, once we're actually in, what ends up happening is that our bodies very quickly acclimatize to the temperature of the water around us. And what that means is that if we do that once, where we go in one go and we go right the way in up to our shoulders in one go, we only get that cold, jarring tension feeling once. Even more so if we just jump in. Like that initial, like if we just jump in the water, yeah, that initial jump can feel really jarring because you've gone from one extreme to the other in an instant. And yeah, you can have that moment, but you're in then, and you don't have to repeat the process over and over and over again. Well, the same is very true with our emotions, which is that if we kind of dip our toes in a little bit and then it's like, oh no, I'm staying here. And then we allow it a little bit more. And then we stay there and then we allow it a little bit more. Every time we allow it that little bit more, we're dealing with that jarring experience again. And we're dealing with that uncomfortable experience again. If we just allow ourselves to just wade into the emotion and go fully into it, yes, you're still going to get that jarring experience, that uncomfortable experience to begin with, because a lot of the time, the reason that we're hesitant about these emotions is because they're not the comfortable ones. Like they're not the ones that feel like we might go in both feet first and like duck under the water if we're going into joy, although not always the case. We'll come back to that in a second. But when it's the uncomfortable emotions, like every time we ease into it a little bit more, we have that jarring experience again and again and again.
And there's an underlying anxiety that happens with that too, like, you hold on to
You're
it 'cause
anticipating.
you are, and there's certain points where you know it's gonna get worse, like, if you're wading into the water, I'm like, "Okay, my toes are cold, my knees are cold. Oh, it's gonna get to my bits, and that's gonna be really cold." And, like, you're anxious for the point where it hits your bits, and then, then there's some more bits that you're like, "Oh, I'm fine," until, "Oh, and there they go underneath." Like, and you have this, like, "I just need to do it," and there's this internal struggle, and it's like, I mean, I'm gonna say,
Just the moral of the story is get all your bits in
wet.
one go.
You know that it's gonna go to that point, but it's like,
I think we found our intro for the podcast.
But that's all I
so
can
true,
think about
though.
when you're
Yes.
talking about, and like just that I started tensing up, feeling that, like,
Yeah.
that slow approach into water, and it's like, "Oh, but it's gonna get there, and that's gonna," like, just get there. Like,
Yes.
that's the destination, it's in this journey, I know that this I'm gonna get up to my shoulders, like, that's where this is
Yeah.
leading to. Let's get to our
Yes.
shoulders.
Right. And so going back to what I mentioned in the last episode, like we're talking about it in this context of like, well, maybe you start off in the kiddie pool. And it's
Mhm.
like, and a lot of the time, sometimes these pools are at different temperatures. So if you imagine it like, like rather than the size of the pool, I used that as the example last time, just because like contextually, nobody had a clue what I was talking about in that episode because I hadn't talked about this analogy yet. But I think it's better to kind of think about it in terms of like the intensity of emotion that we're dealing with, as in like the intensity of the experience we're dealing with it being like different temperatures. So it's like initially we might like try this with a kiddie pool, which might have a slightly higher temperature to it, where it's like, okay, we're going to go into the kiddie pool and we're going to go fully in. And there's still a contrast with where it was
Mhm.
before we were sunbathing, but it's not so much of a contrast, which means that, yeah, we're still going to go all in quickly, but that all in is a little bit easier than it would be if we were going into an ice bath. And so it's
Mhm.
like, then the next level is that we go into an adult pool where it's like, okay, so now we know we can do it with the kiddie pool. We know what the process is like. And we've figured out, okay, what do we do? We like breathe a little bit and we maybe kind of, as I said, we duck our shoulders under the water quickly and we stay under the water, because if we duck in and then we duck out, and this is what tends to happen is when we're going in the pool, it's like we duck under the water and we jump back out again. And then we've got the breeze, which makes us colder than we were in the first place. And it's like, and then we've got to dive back in again. So it's like duck under the water and stay under the water. Like you learn with the kiddie pool to be like, okay, if I go out and back in, if I go in and then back out again, that's actually less comfortable as a process than just going in, getting my shoulders under, and just staying in the water for a period of time. Then we might do it with the adult pool, which is like a little bit cooler. So it's like we know what the process is. We know we want to go fully in up to our shoulders as quickly as possible. Maybe we decide we're just going to jump in off the freaking side of the pool because actually that's easier. That's better for us. But we yes, we're gonna have a more the contrast is larger, so that initial shock is going to be greater. But in actual fact, the process is very similar. Like once you're actually in, very quickly you're going to acclimatize. And then the next step might be an ice bath, where it's the same thing. You want to get in as quickly as possible, get under the water and stay there, because if you go into an ice bath and then you come back out again, chances are the breeze is going to actually make you feel more cold. So you're better off just kind of getting in and staying in. And it's interesting because I think that like it reminds me of like when I was in Canada and we went to a hot springs and we go into this like beautifully warm water, and then the guys went into the plunge pool. I did not go into the plunge pool, which was, I mean, there were snow-capped mountains around us and it wasn't heated. It was freaking cold. That one I didn't do. But the interesting thing is that how the body works. It reminds me of, I went to a hot springs. Well, it's on airplane mode, but I forgot to turn off my alarm. Oh, well, that was my little
We're
reminder
getting
to meet my
there.
needs. I went to a place called Harmon Hot Springs. If you haven't been, it was beautiful. I think it was, there was affected by fires a while ago. I actually think it's open again now. It was a place that I loved to go with a group of friends of mine when I was in San Francisco. Clothing optional, just warning in case people just go, oh yeah, let's go along to Harmon Hot Springs. Like and it is optional. Like you can wear bathing suit if you want to. You don't have to, but just heads up in case you're like, let's go to the hot springs. They're like, oh, this is not what I expected. Anyway, back onto the topic of the water. In there, they have this they have a plunge bath which is very very hot, and they have a plunge bath which is very very cold. And there was a process that I got suggested to do, which is you go 7 times into one, like immediately from one to the other, from one to the other, from one to the other. Now the interesting thing is that once you are actually in the hot springs, the hot pool or the cold pool, if you just allow yourself to be in it, what ends up happening is you get this kind of little area around your body where the temperature of the water right next to your body isn't quite as hot or isn't quite as cold as the rest of it, because your body is affecting the temperature of the water. Now, if you kind of constantly fight it while you're in there and you move a lot, it's a hotter and a colder experience because you don't have that layer around your body. If you just allow yourself to be in it, it's actually much easier. And if you allow yourself to move seamlessly through it, like the slower I move through it, not as in like slower getting into it or getting out of it, but while I was in there, just allowing myself to gently move myself through it made it a more manageable experience. And it got to the point where, I mean, like I like it was a very I wouldn't say it was an out of body experience. It was like a more in body experience than I kind of ever had. Like at one point, I remember kind of coming out the hot pool, and I felt like this like Phoenix goddess, like rising from the ashes. Like it felt
The
amazing.
steam and
Yeah, and just the feeling of vibrancy in your body, like your cells being alive in a way that they're not because of the contrast between the two and what it does to the body. Fabulous. I loved it. I mean, it's been a large number of years since I've been there, but it was a great experience. But the key thing was going in quickly, and then when you're in it, allowing yourself to just be in it, and that transformed that experience for me. And as somebody who, I mean, I pretty regularly go to a pool here because I've been, I said on a couple of episodes ago, I've been dealing with some back issues recently. And it's something that I've learned is that by going and I literally just stand in the pool, I read something on my iPad while I'm in there. And while I'm in there, I basically, I move and stretch my body because it's a way of, I'm able to move in different ways that I'm able to, if I'm out of the water, and just not having gravity acting on me in quite the same way, it provides some relief to my back. Then the interesting thing is, I mean, this last week alone, I've probably been to the pool, I don't know, 4 or 5 times in the space of the last week. If every time I went to the pool, I was like, okay, my toes are in. Okay, my ankles are in. Okay, my shins are in. Like it would be a pretty painful experience every time I went. It would like mean I probably wouldn't want to go to the pool as much. And now I'm like, I put my iPad on the side of the pool and I wade straight in. I get in under my shoulders. I sit and I read and I do my stretches. And it's the same thing with emotions. Like if we make it a more uncomfortable process and a harder process than it has to be, every time we do it, we're less inclined to do it. And it makes us more hesitant. The more we resist it, the more we end up resisting it, because the more uncomfortable and difficult the process becomes, the more we allow ourselves to just go fully into whatever the emotion is that we are processing and experiencing at that point in time, the easier that process gets. It's like, yeah, okay, we know that initial jump in is probably going to be a little bit less fun than it is just hanging out in there. But we very, very quickly get in it. And then here's the thing, here's the kicker. When you actually get into it and you have acclimatized, even if it's a slightly uncomfortable experience, and this is like the ice bath is a good analogy for this. Like it's still quite an uncomfortable experience being in there, like when it's super cold. But you can start to enjoy it a little bit because you know the benefit you are getting from being in the process. And this reminds me very much of another thing. I'm going to come back to the arrow. I will come back to it in a minute, I promise. I have remembered
it's in the notes, so we're good.
Yes, exactly. The other kind of similar experience that this reminds me of is like where you do something that's like slightly uncomfortable, but you know it's providing you a benefit, so you get to enjoy it. Is Serena and I did a detox beginning of last year, and when I say a detox, there are detoxes and there are detoxes, and this is a detox. Like this is not yeah, we're gonna have a couple of juices. Like this is a very intensive
so that
process.
You're doing what?
Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was like, "What?" And I was telling him about some of the shakes, and I mean, let's be honest, they're not shakes at all. That's a misnomer.
I mean, it's shaken.
It's shaken, but that's about the only thing it has in common with a shake, right?
Just charcoal and lemon. That's all I can taste right now.
Yeah. And so when I do this detox, the very first time I did it, I actually bolted another one onto the end of it. It's a 3-week detox, but actually I ended up doing 6 weeks. And I remember thinking, if I mentally view this as eating and drinking, I'm going to spend the entire time I'm doing it thinking about what I'm not eating and what I'm not drinking, and that this doesn't taste as good as the stuff that I normally eat and drink. Instead, what I did was I viewed it as everything I was putting in my body was medicine. I was just using food and drink as medicine, basically, for this period of time. And it is a very intensive process. Some of the things you eat and drink are amazing. Like when you're doing the liver cleanse, like there's a beet salad that you have that's got lemon and olive oil and cinnamon. And I never would have thought that was a combination that would have worked. Love it. I would eat that as a snack any day of the week. There are some things that do not have the same flavor profile, and that you basically hold your nose and neck it quickly to get it done. Again, same sort of thing. It's like, if I do it sip by sip, it's going to be a more uncomfortable process. It's just like, no, do it in one and done. But the interesting thing about it is, the very first time I did it, I was like, oh God, I don't think I'm ever going to want to do this again. And then Serena and I were talking about detoxing beginning of last year. And I was like, well, there's this detox that I've done before. It is pretty intensive. If you want to do it together, we can do it. And we did. And the second time I did it, I'm like, oh, it's still not exactly fun to do. But the interesting thing is that by doing it, I was able to feel the benefit of doing it. And both while you're doing it and on the other side of it. And so a couple of weeks ago, I made the decision that when I get back from my vacation next week, and I've got to be very, very careful I don't pre-tox before I detox, because that would be very tempting to do. I'm like, I'm not sure the benefit I'm going to get from a detox if I've spent the entire week previously just drinking and eating everything in sight. So, and interestingly enough, it's already making me mindful about what I'm going to eat and drink while I'm away. Not denying myself, but just making better choices that feel more balanced. But the interesting thing is that I made this decision a couple of weeks ago to do this detox. And I was telling this friend about it. And I can remember like the look on his face. He was like, what? This sounds awful. I am excited about doing this detox because I know how good it's going to feel both while I'm doing it and on the other side of it, which means even when I'm in the process of doing it, even when I'm doing something that doesn't necessarily taste that great, I still am going to be able to get to enjoy it because I know the benefit that it's giving me. And the same kind of parallel runs with the emotional stuff, which is like anybody who's had a really good crying session knows how cathartic it can feel and how good we feel on the other side of it, which means that even though the actual thing that you're feeling at the time that you're crying might feel unpleasant, there's a part of you that kind of gets to enjoy that, because it's like, yes, I know this isn't the nicest thing as I'm doing it, but I know this is good for me. I know the benefit I'm getting from this, and I know how good I'm going to feel on the other side of it. And it adds this kind of odd element to it where it's like you're both not enjoying something and enjoying it at the same time, and something feels slightly uncomfortable and enjoyable at the same time. And it's a little bit weird, but that's going to be my experience. I don't know what your experience has been with it, Serena.
Yeah, definitely. Like I was saying earlier, the contradictory emotions, like sometimes something comes out and it's that same thing. Like there are times where I'm a puddle and I'm sitting there, I'm like, this fucking sucks. This, like, I don't want to be this way. And I'm like, and if I try to pull myself out of it before it's time, and I know before it's time, and I'm like, nope, I'm just going to, change my mindset. And sometimes that is what we need based on the circumstances, or if we need to cope short term with something. But for the most part, when I'm in something, it's like, all right, like you said last episode, own it. Like, I'm here. Let me just be here and process it, because if I finish it or don't finish it, or something else comes
cut
in,
the process short.
I'm just going to be back in the process whenever it decides to pop back up again. So I've really found that staying in the uncomfortable, like you said, it's the first few times it's really uncomfortable. Now I can just be in it and be like, all right, I'm in it, and then I'm less in it, and then sometimes like the goal is to be out of it. And like just honoring where I'm at with it, and whatever comes up in the interim of, I'm in sadness and all of a sudden anger pops up, like, oh, okay, like
that's where we are.
Deal with you. Yeah, I'll deal with you later. Or like, oh, hey,
come join the party.
Yeah, like if we're gonna do this, let's do this. Like,
right.
It's
the one thing I'll add to what Serena has just said is that yes, it's important to be in it and allow yourself to fully be in it, and we don't want to like halt the process just because the process is uncomfortable. However, there is also a case for because it takes energy to process our emotions. And sometimes we don't have the capacity to process the entirety of what's present. So it is okay to pause the process, to go and resource yourself and give yourself a break from processing in order that you've got the capacity to come back and process some more. Like that is okay. There's a difference between, okay, I need to tap out for the second and I'm going to tap back in again once I've got the capacity to do it, and this is too uncomfortable, I want to stop this. Those are two very different things. So back to the arrow. The other kind of analogy that's sort of similar to the swimming pool analogy is that I don't know how many people listening to this know, but I'm actually a qualified and certified extreme experiences facilitator, which means that I'm a qualified and certified firewalking instructor. I'm a glass walking instructor, board breaking, brick breaking, arrow breaking, steel rebar bending. Low ropes, all kinds of things. It was something I did as a to kind of prove to myself I could do it many years ago. And the interesting thing is that whole I'm going to do this to prove to myself I can do this thing has now meant that I now don't need to prove anything to myself. I was watching a TV show, I think it was earlier this week, and they were doing skydiving from it, and I'm like, nope. Like, could I do it? Yes. Would I probably have an experience doing it that would be an experience to add to my list of experiences? Do I need to prove to myself I can do it? No, I know I could, and I don't particularly want to, and that's okay. So when I was and the interesting thing is that when you learn to be a firewalking instructor or a glass walking instructor, there are they're very good metaphors for different kinds of experiences that we have in life. So, for example, like a firewalking experience is very much about overcoming fear and like getting to the other side of fear and like walking into something that feels scary in order to get to the other side, sort of thing. Glass walking is very much about kind of going within and listening to your intuition and kind of feeling your way through something. So there's different things that these different experiences are good metaphors for. Now, one of the experiences is the arrow break and the steel rebar break. Now, both of these you do on your throat. So basically, you put the point of the arrow on your throat and you put the other end of the arrow on a wall, and you basically move yourself forward in order that the arrow breaks. Now, obviously, when you first do this, the whole thing feels kind of scary because you've got an arrow with a metal point on your throat. Now, anything that you've been taught in life probably is going to encourage you to move away from such an experience. And I'm not saying this is and like, caveat, do not try this at home. Like, only do this with like certified professionals who are qualified, and make sure that you're doing it with the right kind of arrow and that you're doing it with the right kind of like, for example, like with coals, different woods burn at different temperatures, and some of them are things that you would definitely not want to ever use for firewalking. Like pine, for example, you would never want to walk on pine coals. Same thing with glass. Like the glass is prepared in a certain way that it's still glass, but it's prepared in a certain way to make the experience something that is still that kind of edgy experience, but it is safe for you to do. So like all of this, I'm saying that don't try this at home. I feel like an after school special. But with the arrow, the interesting thing about it is that what ends up happening with it is a lot of the time when people go slowly into the arrow, which of course that makes logical sense to do. Like, this is scary. This is like a very sensitive and vulnerable part of my body, and I don't want to just go smashing an arrow into it. That doesn't sound like a good thing to do. The interesting thing is that what ends up happening is that when the point of the arrow gets kind of put onto, and it's not really your throat, it's right at the bottom of your throat, like between your clavicles, when you put it on this point and you lean into it, initially it's really uncomfortable, as you would expect. But what tends to happen at that point is that people get hesitant, and it's like, if you're watching on the video to see what I just said, because otherwise that sounds really odd. But like, you kind of like lean in and then pull back, and then lean in and pull back, and lean in and pull back. And what that does is it just irritates this area, and it keeps pointing it and jabbing it over and over again, which makes it even more uncomfortable. Exactly. That's exactly what happens. If you kind of just, if you lean into it and just keep leaning into it, then what ends up happening is the part of the arrow which is more what's the word? I want to say vulnerable. That's not quite the word I'm looking for. That's more susceptible to break. or to bend and break, at that point, that will start to take the pressure. And what will end up happening is if you move smoothly forward into it, very, very quickly, the arrow will bend and it will break. And actually, it doesn't really hurt that much if you move smoothly with it. If you are hesitant and do it small bits at a time, it hurts the entire way through. And the arrow is the initial step to the steel rebar bending, which is exactly the same thing. You put it on the same point on your neck, and it's like a 6-foot steel rebar, and you have it on you have it on your neck, and you partner with somebody else who has it on their neck, and again you walk towards each other. And what will end up happening is the part of the steel rebar that's most less reinforced. I don't even know whether less reinforced. It will cause the steel rebar to bend, and you will end up with a nice piece. I did used to have mine when I first did it. I don't think I still do, because I mean, I live in another country now, and it's probably something that's been in my parents' garage, and eventually they've gone, "What the hell's this? We'll chuck this away." But yeah, it's, again, you don't expect that you could bend steel rebar with your throat. Like, that's not something you expect. And again, if you hesitate with it, you end up just poking yourself in the throat every single time. If you move with steady pressure and you continue, that pressure then ends up meaning that the steel rebar will eventually bend. It's the same kind of principle with the board break and the brick break. So the board break is a lot of people will see these in various kinds of martial arts trainings, where you break, like, use the heel of your palm to break through a board. And the thing is that if you focus on the board, which is the obstacle, the thing that is difficult, then you end up like actually stopping at the board, and you don't in order to break the board and to break the brick, which is basically a cement slab, you have to focus on getting to the other side of it. And the same is often true with the emotions, is that not only is it uncomfortable when you're hesitant with it, and the same thing is true with the board and the brick. It's like if you just keep slamming your hand into a board, it's pretty painful after a while. Can confirm, as somebody who did not break it on her first or her second try. It took me several attempts to get through it. If you're focused on the thing, and this kind of goes back, interestingly, to a couple of episodes ago when we were talking about what you're wanting, like, what's your outcome? Your outcome in processing your emotions is to process the emotions and get to the other side of it. Like, especially when they're uncomfortable emotions, you're trying to process your experience in order that you can get to the other side where that has been processed and you're no longer carrying that emotional baggage with you. Same is true with the board and the brick, which is like, the idea is to get to the other side of it. You're supposed to focus on the other side of it. And when you focus on the other side of it, that's what enables you to break through. Interesting thing is that I didn't focus I was trying to focus on the other side of it. I thought I was when I first started doing the board. It took me a large number of attempts to get through the board. Interesting enough, the concrete slab, by that point, I knew what I was doing. I went through that in one, which obviously the concrete slab is much harder to get through than the board is. So it's like these are all kind of metaphors for how we want to approach our emotions, which is that we want to allow ourselves to go into the emotion fully rather than kind of tentatively, like, tiptoeing into it. We want to go in gradual stages when it comes to the intensity of emotion process. We're not used to doing it. We want to start off with something not quite as intense to begin with, and then maybe something a little bit more intense and a little bit more and more before we start going into the big stuff. But in actual terms of actually doing it, when we start to go into it, we want to go into it as fully and as quickly as possible and feel it as deeply as we can, as quickly as we can. In order that we can get to the other side. And again, focus on the outcome. What is the outcome? The outcome here is healing. The outcome here is processing. The outcome here is doing what we need to do in order to have a lighter and more resourced experience of life, rather than carrying all this emotional baggage with us that weighs us down and makes it much harder. And when we kind of combine all these I know I've just thrown a whole bunch of different metaphors out at everybody today, but these are just different ways of, like, thinking about these same experiences. And these are different things you can kind of bring to the, like, it's like you can imagine yourself like dipping into a swimming pool when you start to process it. And if you think about it like that, you're much more probably likely to be able to allow yourself to fully go into it. Same thing with the arrow, same thing with the ball. Like, why am I doing this? Because that's the other thing, is that if we don't focus on what our outcome, why are we doing this? We're doing this for healing. We're doing this to have a more resourced capacity. We're doing this to meet our emotional experience expression need. If we don't focus on that, we can just focus on the discomfort at the time. And if we're focused on what's uncomfortable, we're going to be reticent to do it in the future. Whereas if we're focusing on, we're doing this because we want to get to the other side, because we don't want to be carrying this with us anymore, that is the thing that allows us to be able to go, yeah, okay, there are going to be moments through this which are going to be uncomfortable, but the discomfort is far outweighed by the benefit that we get from the healing and the feeling of healing that you get on the other side of it, much like the detox, which is, at this point, I'm like, I feel great by comparison to where I did. And the more we get into this experience, and the reason we suggest doing this with like smaller and lighter experiences to begin with is because once we get into the habit of it, we know what the process is like. It makes it easier to do it with heavier and heavier stuff as we go through. So it's like, okay, yeah, we know what this is like. Yeah, this is the tough bit, and it's okay that this is the tough bit. Like jumping into the pool is like, we know initially it's not going to necessarily be the most fun, but very quickly we're going to be swimming around and we're going to find that this is actually much easier to move through. I'm just realized I've talked a lot right now. Anything you want to add about all of this? And I even remember the thing without the note myself. Anything you want to add to this before we kind of finish up for the day?
I know. I think it's one of those topics we could go on for days and days and days on. And I think that the container-esque thing that we have it in is probably a good place to leave it. And
we've
actually
gone through a lot. Go on.
Coming back to what Claire said at the beginning, the person commenting on, you're the only person who sees heartbreak on the horizon and walks towards it. It's interesting as you get more and more acclimated to processing your emotions and being in your emotions and feeling them fully and deeply, you tend to want to walk towards all of that more, because I find myself doing it too, and I never really would have really identified it. But as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, like when I know it's going to get shitty, I'm like, all right, let's get through this shittiness, because I've processed so many things, and especially recently, that it's like, okay, I know the other side. I just got to get through it. Like, it's
and I think that's the thing. It's like you don't walk towards it because you like heartbreak. Like I don't walk towards this stuff because I like it. I walk towards it because I'm focused on my outcome, and what my outcome is to create an experience of life which is not like marred by emotional baggage. That like I want to be lighter. I want to be freer. I want to feel better in my body, better in my emotional system, better mentally, because especially as people with ADHD, like when you have unexpressed emotions around, it can actually contribute to your brain doing interesting brainy things. Like the more emotional I am if I haven't processed my emotion, it can actually compromise how my brain operates. So it's like I want a better experience of life. I want a more enjoyable experience of day-to-day life, and that's my outcome. My outcome is healing. My outcome is processing. My outcome is a more enjoyable and lighter experience of life. And if you can focus on that becomes the thing. It's like, I want to feel better in my body. So I want to do the detox that maybe isn't that comfortable because I want to feel better in my body. If you want to have a better experience, better emotion experience expression need, and a better better feeling within the body as a result of that, then you want to process the emotions even if they're uncomfortable in the short term. And so the thing is, like, it's not like we're going, yay, look, there's another heartbreak, let's do it. Like it's like we're going, okay, we can see that and we want what's on the other side of that. So let's allow ourselves to go into it in order that we can get to the other side as quickly and as easily and as seamlessly as possible. And the quicker, easier, seamlessly is the thing where you allow yourself to just go fully into it, feel it fully, and allow yourself to move through and out the other side.
And as we do it more for ourselves, then we're better resourced and have more of the capabilities and capacities to help others through their, what they're going through. And it's not to take it on to jump in the hole with them, but to help support their bucket. Be like, oh, you got a big bucket full of shit. I got an extra hand. Let me hold that for, help you hold that. And
or just be with you while you're holding it.
Right. Because you know what it's like to experience that yourself. So
it makes it
nice because it opens it up. It does.
It's like if you go back to the swimming pool analogy, if you don't know how to swim and somebody else dives into the deep end and they look like they're struggling a little bit, it's terrifying. All you want to do is pull them out, be like, no. And it's like, no, I've got this. It's okay. And it's like, no, come out. I don't want you in there because I'm scared, because I wouldn't be able to deal with what you're dealing with. And that's what happens a lot with us now, is that there are only certain people that we allow ourselves to really go there with, because other people can't cope with us being like going fully into it. They're like, what do I do? I don't want to get in there. Like, I don't know. I can't swim in those conditions. Like I haven't done that before, but I like, can you get out of there? I'm not comfortable with you being there. It's scary you being in there right now. And it's like, and the good thing is that once you know how to do it, you're okay with being witness to somebody else going through it. And you're right. So it means that you're able to support others, you don't necessarily do the process for them, or get really even that involved in the process, but even just having somebody there with you while you're doing it, like it can really help, where it's like I know what it's like to get in an ice bath. Like if you've been in an ice bath, you know what it's like to be in an ice bath. So if you're watching somebody else, you're like, it's okay, you got this. Like I know it's uncomfortable, and I know you've got this. I'm here. Like, you're not doing this on your own. And if there's any kind of problems, I'm here to support you with those. But like, you get a cramp or something, here's how you do it. Like, I know what that's like because I've done it myself. Like if you've been in, interestingly enough, I actually haven't been in an ice bath with somebody who does not do well with the cold. I haven't done that as yet in my life. I've done very, very cold pools, but I haven't done an ice bath yet. So I'm saying this as if I had done it. So if you've done it, this is how you can approach the situation. I'm like, don't want people going, oh, you've done an ice bath. No, I haven't. But you said on the podcast, no, I didn't. I was speaking as if, and that's the same thing. It's like, if you are in that process, then you can bear witness and support somebody, and just have that support of someone being there with you while you are doing those things can make all the difference. And I mean, it helps. And I feel kind of safe, like when it comes to processing emotions, like if Serena is sat there with me, or I'm speaking to the person that I process my stuff with, sometimes it can be easier to allow myself to really fully go deeper into it, because I know that I'm not alone in it. And I know that if there's any problem that somebody else, and I mean, I've done this enough that I know I'm not going to get stuck in it. I know what this process looks like, but it allows me to kind of relax fully into it, in a way that is not as easy to do if you're on your own. And so that process can really help. And you doing that process for yourself is the thing that enables you to then be able to do that for others. Because the thing that that's the reason most people pull away from emotion, because they get uncomfortable with other people being in it, because they wouldn't be comfortable being in it themselves. And it's not about the whole process being pleasant, but it's about being able to allow it and being comfortable with the fact that it's uncomfortable, because you want what's on the other side of it.
Well said.
Anything else?
I'm good.
Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. Between now and then, remember to stay safe, to take care of yourself, and to continue to meet your own needs. Lots of love. Bye-bye.
Bye, friends.
That's it for today.
If you like what you heard
and would like to see some of Serena's awesome facial expressions,
check out the video podcast on YouTube.
And remember, the more you resist your uncomfortable emotions, the harder the process is going to be.
Well, shit. It really is that simple.